Hi, I'm Will Storr, and this is my origin story.
Well, Storr, welcome to Origin Story. How are you?
I'm good, thanks, Ben. How you doing?
I'm really good. I'm such a huge fan of you, as you know. We've been chatting offline, and I'm a fan of your new book, A Story is a Deal. In this context, I want to know, what is a story and what is a deal?
Well, when I say a story is a deal, I mean that a story makes a subconscious deal with people, and that's how it persuades. So if you think about it in terms of like a fairy tale, a children's fairy tales are teaching you a lesson, which is like, if you're brave, you will be safe, like maybe Jack and the Beanstalk, or if you're courageous, you'll get prizes. So people love the stories, kids love the stories, but subconsciously they're learning from them, and they're making a deal with you. They're saying, if you behave in this certain way, you're going to get rewards. So that's what a story is a deal is about. It's about how story subconsciously, manipulates us almost into, believing certain things and acting in certain ways, but making this deal with us, saying, if you're going to be, if you're this kind of person, these are going to be your rewards.
One of my favorite reads in the past is your prequel, The Science of Storytelling. This is a promo almost for Will Storr here, but I absolutely love this book. What motivated you to transition from this to the deal-making process that a story makes?
Well, that started life as a course that I used to teach for the Guardian newspaper. They used to have a masterclasses program. So I started teaching science of storytelling as a course. And very quickly I found out that business people were turning up. Like, people were coming from Deloitte and, HSBC and like NGOs. And some people were flying in for like Brussels and America and Singapore. And I felt terrible because they're coming to learn about storytelling to help with their business communication. But I was talking about, the remains of the day and, transparent and all this, TV and literature stuff. So I thought, well, I'll try and build a separate course for them. So that was the Science of Storytelling for Business, which launched, I think, in 2014. And so A Story is a Deal is the book version. So that Science of Storytelling is a book version of my Guardian masterclass for fiction people, and that is the book version of my business storytelling masterclass.
Tell me about your origin story. How did you traverse from being a rock fan as a teen to being fascinated by storytelling and what it can do for humanity?
Well, okay, so so I was big into my music as a kid, and what happened was I failed all my exams because I was very badly behaved as a teenager, and I went to work in a record shop, and when I was working there, I started sort of writing for this local. They don't exist anymore, but they used to call them fanzines. And a fanzine is what Gen X had in place of a blog or a Substack. So basically you're writing, and then you're literally gluing your articles and pictures together on a bit of paper, photocopying it, folding it, and that's your fanzine. And you either sell it or you give it away for free. So there was a fanzine that was based at the local music venue called the Forum, and this was in the Britpop days. Very exciting time for British culture. And we used to have all the bands coming through, Blur didn't come. Oasis came through, Suede, Green Day played, Divine Comedy, all the big bands would come through on their way up, except for Blur for some reason. So I'd interview the bands, and I took over the fanzine at one point. They asked me to take it over. And so, it's like you hustling up for, advertisers. It's the same deal, but it was the Gen X version, the analog version. So I was getting advertisers. So that's what I was doing whilst I was writing, whilst I was working at the record shop, and the record shop was given, I could review all the records. And then so by luck, really, somebody from a national magazine called Loaded, it was called, read something I'd written and said, do you want to do some writing for us? And I was like, yeah. Definitely. So that's how it began. That's how I became a kind of a professional writer.
And you've been such a coveted journalist, but I want to talk about your books. They've seemed to have exploded and proliferated across pop culture to business to, we're chatting offline, so many comics use your books to write. Was that ever the intention with your writing, to proliferate the message of storytelling and its powers across different industries?
No, I mean, as I say, like the book started off as this little course at the Guardian, and when I actually first conceived the book, I thought it was going to be like a side hustle, but it ended up becoming the hustle, so to my surprise, when my agent went out with the proposal for Science of Storytelling, I got the biggest advance I've ever got. And I was like, this doesn't make any sense, because this is literally like, I'd written the Heretics, I'd written Selfie, two big sort of broad vision books trying to figure out how the world works. And this was kind of taking bits of those things and putting it together as this little helpful guide for writers. And to be honest, I was surprised to even get a book deal. I thought maybe we wouldn't even get a deal because it's such a weird idea. But it got the biggest advance I've ever got. So I was surprised about that. And then it just became, this huge thing. Like, I remember, I'll never forget the week it was published. I got a couple of quite mediocre reviews in the newspapers. The Times and the Sunday Times both published these kind of very middling. And there was an academic in the Times that was really sniffy, saying, he's a literature. It was I think it was Oxford literature professor or something, and he was like, it's just a bunch of scientific studies with some storytelling examples attached, and he's clearly not very well read, which just annoyed me, because I was like, have you seen the examples in this book? I worked so hard to make sure there were so many different examples, and so it got some quite mediocre reviews. So I was a bit depressed, but then suddenly lots of people started supporting on Twitter. So Matt Haig, who sold millions of books, said it was the best book on storytelling he's ever read. Adam Rutherford, who's this quite vocal scientist on Twitter, massive following. He's on Radio 4. He's quite a big media personality. He put a tweet out saying it was a masterpiece, and I was like, what? Like, it was like a dream. It was probably the best week I've ever had in my career. It was like, oh my god, like, people really like this book, and I think really it was the tweeters. It was then Hannah Fry, the mathematician, said it was the best book she's read this year, and so yeah, it was just really well received, and then it sort of took off from there. So I think I've got all those people to thank really for it taking off. It's just one of those almost like luck things where lots of people support you in the same kind of concentrated space of time, and that's what makes the difference.
For an author, is the podcast media circuit something new? I can imagine maybe 20 or 30 years ago, a J.K. Rowling, for the lack of a better example, wouldn't be going on like press junkets in the way that authors are now expected to jump on podcasts now. Did that propel you into your podcast guest experience?
Well, I'm really grateful to my podcasters, because what happened after the Science of Storytelling was I published The Status Game, which was the next big vision book, and then that was tumbleweed when it was published. Like my publisher was expecting it to be another bestseller, and I think even the bookshops did it. We sold a lot of books on pre-order, but there was just nothing. And I remember looking it up on Amazon on the day it was published, and it was like, I think it was at 6,500 in the bestseller charts on the day of publication. So it was a disaster. So I was just like, this is a fucking catastrophe. I was really, I was sort of devastated, really. But what rescued that book was the podcasters. I think it's really hard for authors, especially pale male stale ones who are just not very fashionable at the moment, to get much airtime in newspapers, in magazines. They want younger people. They want, women and minorities are the focus of interest in culture at the moment, and have been for a while now. So it's hard to get reviews. It's hard to get broadcast. It's hard to get book festivals. It's really hard to get. If you're a big famous pale male style like a Richard Osborne or a John Ronson, it's easy. But for the mid-tier people like me, it's really hard, because we're the ones that get...
This is what I've got to look forward to.
Yeah, we're the ones that get... Well, no, because you've got your own audience, so it's kind of different. You're doing it the smart way. But say what rescued that book was the podcasters. So like all these, and it is like I joke, it's podcast bros, but it is. It's like almost exclusively, all the white guys that have been pushed out of the mainstream media are now killing it in the podcast world, because the podcast world is a meritocracy. It is like it's much more of a meritocracy than the mainstream media is these days, where they're picking who to support based on lots of other things, including identity. So over time, the Status Game has become really successful purely because of the support from podcasters. Like, that's 100% of the support has been why it's been successful. So I'm really unbelievably grateful to people like you who supported the Status Game, because without that, the book would have just ended up in the remainders bins.
An example in your book of someone that got a lot of media hype and mainstream media hype was the Elizabeth Holmes of Theranos.
Yeah.
She really illuminates the introduction to your book. For the listeners, can you give some context into Elizabeth Holmes and why her story was so powerful?
Yeah, sure. So Elizabeth Holmes obviously is the founder of Theranos or Theranos. I'm not quite sure how you pronounce it. People pronounce it different ways. And so what she said was that she had this amazing device. It was a revolutionary device, and with just one pinprick of blood, it could do this huge array of blood tests on you. So, the same. Traditionally, you'd need to have like a couple of vials of blood drawn out of you, but now she could do it with a pinprick with her device, which she called the Edison, and it was just hugely, just went ballistic. This story went all around the world. She was on all the magazines. She was on all, she was interviewed. She was TED Talked. The whole thing. She kind of deliberately cosplayed as Steve Jobs. She had the same turtleneck jumper he had, and she would lower her voice to make it sound more masculine. So she would do this thing where she would just like look at you without blinking. So there was a kind of a lot of performance going on, but people totally fell for it. They wanted to believe in the story of Elizabeth Holmes. And it wasn't just the press and the media that brought up the story. Even more consequentially, it was investors. So people like Rupert Murdoch and the founders of the Walmart family, huge investors, backed her with millions and millions and millions of dollars. For Rupert Murdoch, it was the biggest investment he's ever made outside his own family of companies. And people like Henry Kissinger sat on her board of directors. So people risked their reputation. And the amazing thing about this was that almost none of them bothered to do any due diligence. So you would have thought if you were going to back this company with hundreds of millions of dollars, you'd go, so Elizabeth, show me this machine then. Can I see it? But they didn't. When I say they didn't, I don't mean everybody. Some of them did, which I think is really telling. So Google Ventures, I think it was Google Ventures, sent somebody out to have one of these blood tests, and they had 2 massive vials of blood drawn from their arm. So we're like, wait a minute, and so Google Ventures declined to invest because they'd actually bothered to test. But people like Murdoch and Kissinger and the Walmart family, these huge people, invested millions of dollars and reputations with no due diligence. Because, in my analysis is that it's because they're just so desperate to believe in her story. And, this was in, I call it, we were in the girl boss era very much at the moment still. It was very much, the girl boss era back then too. And people were crying out for a female Steve Jobs. People were kind of sick of these tech bros. They're all men. We want a woman. And along comes Elizabeth Holmes, ticks all the boxes. She's very eloquent. She seems very smart. No doubt she is very smart. I don't doubt that for a moment. And so people just completely uncritically accepted her story. And, to the extent where her at one point her company was valued at $9 billion. So, as I say in the book, her machine was worthless. It didn't exist. But her story was worth $9 billion. And that's the power of storytelling. That's the power of storytelling that it can beguile even the wealthiest and the smartest people in America fall for the story when it's told well enough.
Do you have any other examples in history whereby a story such as that manipulated or influenced human perception?
Yeah, Jesus, look at the Nazis, the Nazi story of all of the problems that have befallen the German nation are the fault of the Jews. Therefore, the right thing to do is to eradicate them from society and the world. That's a story that lots of people fell for. Lots of very smart people fell for, in the middle of the last century. So people are always, people think in stories. They think in stories, and they believe in stories. Facts and data are kind of overrated as persuasive tools.
There's a quote that brings to life your book that I love, and it's a story is a deal, the deal it makes with identity.
Yeah.
Why is storytelling and identity so synonymous?
Well, to understand that, you've got to understand the fact that story isn't just something that we tell each other. It's not something that we just watch on Netflix or it exists in the form of gossip or speeches that CEOs make. Story is how we live. Story is our experience of the world. So story isn't something that we tell. Story is something that we do. And when you think of your identity, what is your identity? Your identity is the character that you play in the story world, which is your life. So you and me, we are on one level a bag of meat and bones and blood. That's what we are, just like any other animal. But for humans, we're also this character that we play in the story world with this set of ideas about who we were, where we're going, how life works, what morality is, what we want. That's what a human being is. It's this kind of set of ideas that adds up to an identity. And so human beings are obsessed with their identity. Human beings, in lots of cases, value their identity more than they value their actual lives. All the time, human beings choose identity over their life. When those terrorists flew the planes into the towers on 9/11, they were choosing identity, their reputation, their status, the status of their identity over life. That's what happens when people go to war. That's what happens when people die for the revolution. All throughout history, people do this. I mean, in the stories, I talk about smoking. Smoking is this crazy thing that only human beings would do. When I started smoking in the 90s, and I started smoking in the full knowledge that I was gonna get addicted to it. It's gonna cost me loads of money. It's gonna make me stink. But I still did it. Why do people take up smoking knowing that it's a bad idea on a million different levels? Because it makes them look a bit cool. Like smoking makes you look 8% cooler. So people who take up smoking are choosing, just a little bump to their identity, a little increase in status of their identity over their actual lives and their kind of wallets. So we're kind of nuts. It explains a lot of the craziness of human beings. We care extremely deeply. You can't really exaggerate. You can't really exaggerate the extent to which humans obsess over their identity and care about their identity. It's the most important thing to us. With a slight caveat that when we have children, the identity of our children also becomes very important to us. That's also makes sense evolutionarily because they're the extension of our genes.
What is the evolutionary purpose of stories and storytelling?
Originally, storytelling, the purpose of storytelling is to take lots of individual human brains and get them thinking in the same way. So you have to understand what a human is. So a human is an ape. It's not like an ape. We are an ape. We're one of 5 existing species of great ape. But obviously we're very different from the other apes. And the difference is that we are part ape, part ant. As weird as that sounds. We are kind of, you can argue about the ratio, but I would say we're just as much ant as we are ape, really. And so the ant part of us is highly cooperative. So other apes solve the problems of existence as individuals. So they live in troops, but they go out and they sort their own food out, and they're basically solitary individual creatures, apes. But humans don't do that. Humans solve the problems of existence by gathering into groups like an ant does, and the groups are super organisms, by which I mean that the group itself has a goal, as if it's its own living being. And the individual humans in that superorganism all play their part. So that's all of human life. So from a football team to a political party to a religion to a cult to a corporation, that's how we do stuff as humans. We gather into groups like ants and we create these superorganisms. So how do you do that? How do you get all these individual ape brains and get them all thinking in the same direction, knowing that doing the same thing, understanding their roles, understanding what is good behavior, understanding what is bad behavior? How do you coordinate all those things? You do it with story. So every group has a story it tells of the world, about how the world works, about where it should be going, about what is good behavior, what is bad behavior. So that's why we are so obsessed with story, because it's how we function as as an individual member of this highly cooperative group.
In the group dynamic, what is the power of having a shared reality?
Well, we have to have a shared reality in order to function as a group. So if you think about it in terms of the political left and the political right, so each of those groups is like a superorganism in the sense that the left are trying to reorganize society. This is a great generalization, such that there's a bigger welfare state, bigger social care, higher taxation, bigger state, these kinds of ideas. And the right are kind of trying to do the opposite, where they're trying to encourage wealth creation, reduce taxes, increase competition. And so that's what those big kind of superorganisms are doing. And and even a member of those superorganisms, most of their function is to vote for the right parties and to go on Twitter and make the right arguments. Everyone's playing their part in trying to enact the aims of that superorganism. But they're bound together by different stories of the world. So the story that the left tells about capitalism is that it's exploitation, that it's the wealthy few living large on the sweat and toil of the oppressed many. That's basically the story that the left tells about capitalism. And the story the right tells about capitalism is that it's freedom. That before capitalism, it was basically a lord, peasants, and serfs, situation, and life for most people was hellish and horrendous. But capitalism has given us an enormous increase in living standards, even for the poorest, among us, obviously with the homeless accepted. It's given dignity to people. It's enabled social mobility, so you're not stuck as a peasant and stuck as a lord for the whole of your life. So capitalism is exploitation, capitalism is freedom. They're both completely different stories of the world that the left and the right completely believe, generally speaking, that informs their very perception of how they work. So that's an example of how a story takes over individual human minds. It gets them all thinking in one way and gets them all experiencing a particular story of the world. And I think what's particularly interesting about that example of left and right is that what, so you can say, okay, so if the left thinks capitalism is exploitation and the right thinks capitalism is freedom, what's the truth? And for me, the truth is it's both. It's both of those things. So it's true that captains of industry often exploit workers, but it's also true that before capitalism, everything was fucking horrendous, and that capitalism has made life better for the vast majority of us, increased living standards and it enables social mobility. So that's one of the problems with stories. It's one of the reasons it's so dangerous is because it kind of shuts one eye. It enables you only to see kind of half the truth of the world, and so you become ignorant to 50% of reality at least.
I've seen a trend, and perhaps it's because I've worked for large corporations, and the movement towards those ascribing labels to themselves, identity politics, their pronouns, their political sway, their socioeconomic class, to their race, to their sexuality. Have humans always identified themselves or labeled themselves in such way, or is this a more recent phenomena?
Well, obviously, the whole gender pronoun thing is very, 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 very recent. That's a product of very recent sort of Western, psychology. But people have always used all kinds of things to identify themselves with. I mean, from the earliest times of human evolution, people were using their hair to create their identity, tattoos, piercings, language. Humans are kind of billboards for their identity. We are, as I say, we're this set of ideas, and that's because we're cooperative. So what we're doing as we move through our life is we're constantly looking for people to connect with. It's in this sort of detect and connect mode. So we're always looking for people who we can cooperate with. That could be a new friend. So what are friends for? They're for helping you cooperate. Help you get over the obstacles of life. Friends are helpful people. They're companions. A spouse. Assuming that you're straight. What is evolutionary speaking? Your spouse is for helping cooperate the raising of children. Your tribe, your company. So we're constantly looking for people to connect with in order that we can cooperate with them, and then they can help us overcome the problems of existence. But we don't just want to cooperate with anybody. Obviously, we want to cooperate with people who are like us, who are similar to us in lots of ways. And how do we detect similarity? Well, identity. How you dress yourself up. How you define your identity. So, there was the whole thing through the kind of woke era where some people put pronouns in their bio, and some people went, pronouns in the bio is a red flag, so the pronouns in the bio people were like, oh great, pronouns in the bio, this is my kind of people. But for the rest of us, it was like pronouns in the bio, whoops, warning, like this is a potentially sort of difficult person. So that's just a very kind of obvious example of how we use identity to detect and connect. We partly use identity to draw ourselves to people that we have something in common with, or we also used it to repel people that are not going to be cooperative to us. And the human brain is incredibly expert at picking up even the subtlest clues of identity in people's behavior. So there was one really interesting study where people could tell the difference between, what was it? I think it was Americans and Australians. They were showing short clips of Americans and Australians walking and waving, and they could tell who were the Americans and who were the Australians just by the way that they were waving. And they couldn't tell the experimenters how they could tell the difference, but they could reliably tell the difference. And another, a similar set of studies showed that Americans could tell the difference between a Japanese national and a Japanese American just by having them express different emotions like disgust, anger, shame. They could tell the Japanese nationals from the Japanese Americans. And again, they couldn't tell you how they could tell, but they could just tell. And so it could only be by very subtle clues in the way they were moving their face to express emotion, but they could still tell who is American and who is not American. So that's how expert the brain is at picking up these just endless subconscious clues that we're constantly broadcasting about who we are, about our identity.
Do we craft those subconscious clues, or are they part of our source code?
Well, I mean, a lot of it is so it sounds like what I'm saying, that the self is socially constructed, and it a lot of it is socially constructed, but it isn't completely socially constructed. So we have genetic roots, when we're in the womb, we're all genes, and those genes begin to wire us up in a certain way, and then through the first sort of 10, 20 years of our life, our experience kind of finishes wiring us up, and we become a kind of certain kind of person. So the kind of identity we have has those genetic roots. We want an identity that reflects how we feel about the world, how we feel about ourselves. So psychologists find that your kind of personality, which is partly genetic, directs the kind of literature that you enjoy, the kind of stories that you enjoy, the kind of music that you listen to, the kind of art that you like. So it's not true to say that the identity is purely socially constructed. We come out of the womb sort of pointing in a certain direction. We become a certain kind of person, and as we're becoming a certain kind of person, we're constructing this identity that kind of matches, and reflects how we feel and how we feel about the world.
How important or integral is it to act with quote unquote authenticity? Does authenticity exist, or are we just a mirror image of where we want to fit into and plug into?
Well, authenticity is a bit of a lie. So when
I knew you were going to say that, Will.
Yeah. When psychologists study authenticity, when they try and look into and dig into when people talk about I was behaving authentically in this moment, what they really mean is this is the kind of person I wish and hope to be. So the authentic self is really the desired self. So when people are at their very best, they feel that they're being authentic, but it's kind of bullshit, because really the authentic you is probably the average of your behaviors, not the very best of your behaviors. So that's the authenticity is a bit of a lie that we tell ourselves to make ourselves feel good, and to persuade other people that we are kind of better than we really are, I think.
I went through a rebrand with a show, now calling it Origin Story, with I guess a vision statement that people should be embracing their origin story because it's their competitive advantage.
Right.
How likely do you think it is for people to do that?
How do you mean? I don't...
Like all the facets of their upbringing that makes them them, all of the curiosities that they have, all of the experiences, both positive and negative, some of the turmoil they might have faced, some of the weird quirks and interests that they might have picked up along the way. When society might not normalize some of those experiences or validate them, how important or how likely is it someone would embrace those?
Well, I think what you're saying is about people's not authentic self, but kind of unique self. They're unique
Yeah.
ways of thinking and being, and what makes them unique. And I do think that's really important for people. Like one of the things that really came clear to me when I was writing A Story is a Deal was the power of identification. So how does an artist get a fan base? How does an author get someone to care about the character that they're writing about? How does a politician get someone to really, passionately support them, not just vote for them, but really passionately support them? And the answer is identification. It goes back to that whole thing of attracting like-minded people to us and repelling people who aren't like that. And so what that taught me was that people should have the courage to really show people who they are, even though it's going to be divisive. Because really that's the kind of point. You want to be divisive, because the more people that you push away, the more you attract your people. And when you do that, they become more passionate because they're like, this person's like me. That you become part of their identity. And so that's why you get phenomena like the Swifties, who are just these insane cult-like bunch of crazies who do anything to support Taylor Swift. And if you do anything, like they go after her ex-boyfriends, like they're nuts. But they are, but they're all mostly young women who look at Taylor and go, that's me. She's like me. I struggle in love too, and I'm also pretty. So the more you have the courage to show the world who you are, and the more you have the courage to repel people, the more you will be rewarded with passionate, loyal fan base.
What about this term identity crisis? Does it exist? What does it mean from your analysis?
Identity crisis is really interesting. I've been writing about that recently. So identity crisis. So what might an identity crisis be? I think there's an extent to which people can have overly simplistic identities. So, you're from Scotland. There's lots of people in Scotland. Their identity is I'm Scottish. That's kind of who they are. It's the same. We have the same in England. Welsh people get a bit like that. You get some men whose whole identity is I'm a man, and women at the same. I think a healthy identity is complex. You have kind of multiple facets to your identity. And I think an identity crisis can happen when somebody puts too much, has an overly simplistic identity, and then something goes wrong with that identity. If my identity 100% is as a writer, and then my career starts tailing off, as it inevitably will, I'm gonna have an identity crisis, because who the fuck am I? I mean, I actually was talking to an old school friend a while ago, and she left school and she had kids at an early age, and she's raised 4 or 5 children, and the children are now leaving home, and she's depressed, she's stressed. She's in a bad psychological place, because it's like, who am I? So that's an identity crisis, because her whole identity was I'm a mum, and now she's not a mum anymore. So who is she? So yeah. I'm having a similar thing in a way. I've just turned 50. I haven't got used to having an identity of somebody as an old person, but when I look in the mirror, I'm seeing an old person, and it's fucking depressing. Like it's not very nice. So like I think I'm having a bit of an identity crisis at the moment, because I've flipped into my 50s, and like I don't want to be in my 50s, but like so that affects your identity. So I think the identity crisis is definitely a real thing.
What's the remedy for that? Is it to accept your new self, or is it to work towards this desired self?
Yeah, you need to find,
especially in the sense of aging, right? I can imagine that's why loads of middle-aged women get Botox, especially celebrities who are on camera, and they have this delta between who they used to see on screen and who they are now. I can imagine that can be such an encouragement of Botox and cosmetic filler and all these types of things.
That's why people do it, of course. Yeah, because they still have. I mean, lots of people. A big part of their identity is I'm attractive. Thank God that's not me. It's never been me, but like for a lot of people and a lot of women, it is. Like a lot of people's identity is bound up in being attractive, and so when that starts to go away, as it always does, the wall is real, and nobody gets away with it. They go to other things. I mean, I've never been identified as somebody that's attractive, but I spray my bald patch with Unthin. I use Ozempic to try and keep the weight off. I'm doing that stuff, so I'm not condescending to people who do that stuff. So I do that stuff. I whiten my teeth, you know.
Well, I was on the flight with some eye masks on earlier, just to let you know.
Yeah. So you know, it's part of how we look is part of our identity. So yeah. And as to the question of the remedy, I think you have to find new games to play in life. You know, you got to call them status games. So you know, part of what we're doing in life is we're how does a human being assess the condition of their identity? Well, they do it in two ways: your level of connection to other people. So, you know, how many people accept me and love me and want to hang out with me, and status. How much status do other people give me? How much value do I feel like I'm adding to the human family? And so you increase stores of connection and status pretty much by playing status games, by finding stuff to do, people to connect with, and playing status games with them. And I think status games are a massive source of identity. So you know, if someone's career starts tailing off, they might if they're young enough, they might maybe age isn't even a factor. They might want to find a new career to do, a new status game to play, a new set of people to cooperate with and to earn status from.
Do you think that's one of the benefits of fatherhood, is that you then denote or delegate your status to the efficacy of usually your son, if not your daughter?
Absolutely right. Yeah. So I think parents. One of the great things about parenthood is that it's a kind of partial inoculation against some of this stuff. And you even see it on social media when people become parents. They remove their own face from their social media and they put in they put in their children instead. It's like a weirdly symbolic thing saying I am now my children, and that's kind of how it should be. Like I think evolutionarily they put all of their they start playing status games through their children, so the kids' success becomes their success, and of course that can become pathological when parents become too pushy. but that's why they become pushy. You know, yes, it's partly because they care about their children in a genuine way, but it's also because their status, like if they fail, the kids fail, the parents feel like I've failed.
I remember growing up, I was a hopeless footballer, and I would dread a Sunday because my dad would always be pitch side, working class Scottish man, whose only vocabulary consisted of fucking cunt, and he would scream at me from the sideline, almost those words when I wasn't performing, and I thought it was because he wanted better for me, but I realized it's because he wanted better for me because it was better for him.
Yeah,
and I only learned that through reading your book. Like, why was he so harsh on an 8-year-old or a 9-year-old or 10-year-old? And it's because he was harsh on himself. That's
right. I mean, that's a pretty horrendous situation to be in, to have somebody saying fucking cunt at you at that age. I mean, I had a similar thing, not as sweary, but my dad was a working class Yorkshire boy who gained a scholarship to Oxford University, and so he was desperate for me to go to Oxford as well. And I always felt growing up, you know, but like it was a similar thing where there was a huge amount of pressure from my parents to succeed at school, to the extent where my teachers would sometimes say to me, "We know your parents are putting too much pressure on you," and I always felt, even as a kid, this is not really to do. It wasn't coming from a place of love and care for me. It was all about them and my sons at Oxford. And of course, I failed on my exams. It was a complete disaster. You know, like it
but
was
who's
a total.
laughing now?
Yeah, well, yeah. It was a disaster. So you know, I didn't even. Yeah, it was a disaster. So, but yeah, it was the same thing as your footballing dad. It was nothing. It was really nothing to do with an altruistic love and care for me. It was all about they get to say to people, "My son's at Oxford," and I even, you know, understood that as an 8-year-old. Like that was always what I thought was really going on. And
being so viscerally aware of this through your literature, how has your perception of your friends, your mentors, your parents, your family changed now that you can, I guess, look at them with compassion when they are following some of the rules and laws of your books?
Yeah, it's good. I mean, like I think understanding this stuff is really helpful because it does make you much more empathetic to other people, but also to yourself. You know, like you can see when you're doing some of this stuff. So you know, one of the things that drives people mad is you know, there's an effect called naive realism, which I think is a really powerful concept. And naive realism is the idea that everybody feels that they have this perfect, undisguised view of reality, that the truth of the situation is obvious. So a Trump person who's you know, following Trump and believing Trump will go, but it's obvious. It's just obvious that what he's doing is correct. Whereas somebody that prefers the Democrats Kamala Harris will be saying, but it's obvious that my team are on the side of the right, and it's that sense of it's obvious. That's the dangerous thing, because it's like the logic is, well, it's obvious that Trump is evil or Trump is good. Therefore, if you don't agree with me, you can't be mistaken because it's obvious. That means you must be evil. That's how people think, and so understanding this stuff, it lessens that effect. Like, it still boggles my mind that the kinds of things that people can believe. But then I realize, but I've probably got those beliefs too, that I'm completely convinced are correct, but might not be correct. So you can't, like I write about this thing about you've got to accept the impossible truth of your wrongness. Like, you feel like it's impossible that you can be wrong about your dearly held beliefs, but you probably are, because the chances that you are uniquely correct about everything you believe, a zero. Like, you're not Jesus, you're not God.
I'm a streetweight guy with a podcast.
Yeah,
Well.
yeah, exactly. But of course, it's one of those sort of weird paradoxes where you think, well, okay, I accept that I'm not Jesus. I can't be the only person in the history of the world who is 100% correct about everything. And you think, okay, well, what am I wrong about then? You think about this and that. You're not your dearly held beliefs, the beliefs that make up your identity, and you just can't see it. You think, well, I'm right about that. I'm definitely right about that. Like, you can't think your way out of this trap of naive realism. So that's one of the benefits of understanding this stuff, is that you have to have this kind of dual consciousness where you say, well, I believe what I believe, but also in an abstract sense, I accept that I might be completely wrong. And this person who my emotions want to tell me is an evil bastard who needs to be destroyed, they might be right. And also, even if they're not right, they're just subject to human forces. They're subject to stories, just as we all are. So you can't blame them for believing this thing, because they've got a storytelling brain just as you have. So it does kind of lessen the temperature of these kind of conflicts that we get into.
One thing that I'm not sure whether to thank you for or hate you for is understanding how businesses tap into that and play on identity. Every time I watch an advert now, whether it's a short YouTube ad or a TV ad, I'm looking for the storytelling that's taking place, that's talking to me as a person. How do brands and businesses use storytelling? And do you have any prominent examples through society? I understand that the Mac 1984 campaign is one of the biggest ones in your book, or for example, why people choose Starbucks over McDonald's coffee. They're the two ones that stick with me. But do you have any either those or other examples of how business bring it to life?
Yeah. So again, one of the things that really stayed with me from writing A Story is a Deal is quite how powerful and actually how simple this stuff is. So one of the most famous Apple ads. I mean, and initially I was quite reluctant to talk about Apple because it's so obvious, but then it's like you realise that if you're going to write about business storytelling and you don't write about Apple, it's like writing the Sons of Storytelling, not writing about Shakespeare. It's like they're like the Steve Jobs Apple era was probably the greatest era of business storytelling there has ever been. Like, he just had an incredible instinct for it. And one of the ads that they did was that Think Different ad. So it was like, we are the, I can't remember how it went, the creators, the rule breakers, there was pictures of John Lennon and Gandhi and Mother Teresa and, all these kind of like world-changing people. And what's amazing about that ad was, probably how successful it is, but also it contains no information about the product. Nothing. Zero. And this was at a time when Apple was really struggling. Their machines weren't as good technically as their competition, as PCs. They were more expensive. They were in a dark place when in that kind of Think Different era. But the Think Different campaign was really successful, and it was 100% an appeal to identity. It was saying, if you're a creative person, if you're the kind of person that wants to change the world and not one of these sad sack office drones, buying a PC, you need to buy an Apple. And of course, it's massively successful. Like, even when I was very young, before the iMac era, when Apple became what Apple is today, it was still the skateboarders, the musicians. It was still cool, much cooler to have a Mac, to have an Apple computer than it was to have a PC, or a PC laptop. So that's an example, and really all you've got to do to make that work is to figure out who your audience is. Like, what are their values? What's their story of the world? How do they see themselves? What's their definition of high status? And just reflect it back to them. That's it. You show them a mirror, and then that's your advert. There's another example in the book which I thought was really good, which is from Molson Beer. And at the time, Molson Beer is a Canadian beer brand, were struggling because rivals were coming up. There was also, it was very cool to drink small brewery, microbrewery, kind of like bespoke, I don't know what the word is, beers. And wine was increasing popularity. So Molson had to come up with this ad campaign to kind of reanimate their brand. And this guy came out with this advert called "I Am Canadian," and it was based on this sort of neurosis Canadians have, quite rightly, that people can't tell the difference between Americans and Canadians. Like and lots of Americans kind of think Canadians are just like them. And all it was this Canadian guy on a stage saying, just listing the differences between America and Canada. It's Z, not Z. It's this, that, and the other. And it was just like Think Different. It was like, this is who we are, and it was a list. And it was just immediately like viral in the sense it was hugely popular. I think the people started calling it the rant. In an act of absolute genius, the first time this was broadcast, they put the ad on in the advert break during the Academy Awards, just after they'd shown the South Park song "Blame Canada." So all the Canadians were really angry about "Blame Canada," and then they were shown "I'm Canadian." So overnight it became this huge thing, and I forget the actual number, but it put millions and millions of dollars onto the share price of Molson Beer in a matter of weeks, which is immediately successful. And literally all you're doing is showing somebody their identity. You're saying, "This is you," and then they go, "Oh," and it's that thing again about connected with like-minded people. The subconscious brain goes, "Oh, Molson Beer, that's me. It's part of my identity. So I'm going to drink Molson Beer." And if you're creative, "Oh, Apple, that's part of my identity. I'm going to start using Apple products because it's going to help show the world that I am creative. I'm Gandhi. I'm John Lennon. And I want everyone to know that." So that's how that's working.
I interviewed a fascinating fella called Campbell McLaren around a year ago, and Campbell McLaren is the original founder or co-creator of the UFC. And he kind of passed it off to the Fertitta brothers and Dana White. He got merged out of the business because his philosophy that there should be no rules. Okay. So you had really kind of aggressive, lean, six-pack, chiseled guys fighting like sumo wrestlers, different weight classes.
Wow.
And it was a spectacle. But when he left that, he started his new venture, which is Combate Global, which is the equivalent of the UFC, but in Latin America. And what they do differently than what the UFC does is that they really play on identity. So they build these global superstars that no one's ever heard of because they represent their town or their country. So it's not, I don't know their names, it's not like Lucero Acosta versus XYZ, it's Mexico versus Brazil. And I believe in Latin America, it competes very well with the UFC. Not because of the budget, but because of the identity of the fighters and how they match those up.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's a great example of there's the simple power of appealing to people's identity. We are obsessed with our identity, and it's that magical thing of identification. If we identify with a brand or a politician or a pop star, we kind of fold that thing into our own personality. So we start supporting it and defending it as if it's us.
And do you have to be anti something as well for that to be successful? I think in that scenario, it's one country versus the other. I think Perfect Head and their marketing campaign, they wanted to be almost anti-Red Bull. They couldn't be like Red Bull because Red Bull's available, but they had to stand for something and by standing for something, they had to stand against something.
I don't think you have to. Like if you think about Think Different, I mean, Apple did do their "I'm a Mac, I'm a PC" ads, which were much more on the nose in terms of being against something. So I don't think you have to be against anything. But it definitely helps. So when you look at the science of storytelling, stories that feature an enemy, an antagonist, are much more successful in persuasion. You get higher spikes of emotion. So it definitely helps with your story if you have a kind of an antagonist, someone to kind of push against. Like Theranos, there's no enemy in that story really, apart from maybe death, which is a bit vague and abstract. So
I guess there might have been an enemy really, because she was like the first female self-started billionaire, right?
Yeah.
So she was against the people that used to occupy that space.
But she never
subliminally.
told a story about that.
Oh, okay.
Like, like she was surrounded by men. Like her board of directors was exclusively male, I think. They were all men. So I don't think there was anything in her that was. I don't remember reading any kind of feminist rhetoric from her in that sense. I mean, it's implied, of course, it's implied a little bit, but I don't think it would be accurate to say that she really had, deployed enemies in her storytelling, particularly.
Have you came across I think it's the newest, it may not be the newest, but one of the newest Nike campaigns with William Dafoe? And
No.
it's called something like, Am I a bad person? And he goes on this rant around being, I can't remember the whole script, but he essentially says, am I a bad person for being competitive?
Oh, right.
And then it goes through a sequence of different athletes being angry and competitive and in flow state. And it's a very left field step back into what Nike, for me, used to stand for, which was extreme competition, caring nothing about being the best. And I felt like I could run a marathon after watching it. Well,
Amazing.
honestly, because it kind of normalized me being quite a competitive person, and especially in a society where we are more egalitarian than ever before. Equality and equity is really important. That message was really tapped into my identity of being like, oh no, it's okay to be an outlier.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Now, I've definitely going to look that up because that sounds amazing. And again, it's that sense of, people. I mean, it's interesting that Nike have gone in that direction because I think there's a lot of discourse at the moment about how, in recent decades, society's become feminized. And I think it was Mark Zuckerberg that said to talk about bringing some masculine energy back into the world. And it feels like that's what that campaign is kind of doing. It's saying, there's nothing wrong with being competitive, and of course, people like you who are competitive, you identify with that. That's me. You see yourself in that ad, and what that ad is offering status. It's saying, I see who you are, and it's good. You've been told it's bad, but it's good, and of course, that feels amazing. So that sounds like a really effective bit of marketing. And again, it's all about identity. That's nothing to do. They're not telling you about the quality of the product. There's nothing in there about you're going to shoot more hoops with a Nike shoe on, or run faster, or sweat easier. Nothing. It's 100% an appeal to identity.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And I've seen it in the same industry. I believe it's Gymshark, and I'm friends with the brand. They've moved slightly away from the body positivity movement. Huh. Apparently, there's a correlation between that era of advertising and revenue or profit. And they've kind of went back to the old school bodybuilding, using kind of anomalies of athletes to represent their brand. And I've been someone that's struggled with my weight and been overweight in the past before I started this podcast. And I'm thinking from an individualistic point of view, would I aspire or feel solaced or have comfort in seeing someone that looked like me representing the clothes that I would want to wear, or would I feel more comfortable or inspired as such to see someone who's double my muscle mass and half my body fat percentage? I'm trying to wrestle in my brain what one I would ascribe more to, and I think it is that desired state.
Yeah.
And I wonder if they've clocked onto that. I believe it's Gymshark.
Yeah, because again, with that, one of those appeals to it is you're offering status. So it's doing that kind of slightly nuanced thing of saying, this is someone like you, but it's kind of a much better version. In the same way that Think Different, nobody literally thinks they're as good as John Lennon or Gandhi or Mother Teresa, but this is who I want to be. This is my kind of person. But this is like a super advanced, godlike version. And I guess that's what people like Gymshark are doing in that instance. We're saying, we are for people like you, but look who you could be. Look who you could be if you use Gymshark clothing.
I can't believe I'm bringing this example up. Well, I interviewed a retired male porn star a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, a guy called Sterling Cooper. Very fascinating episode. And I was wanting to understand the categories that kind of sit on the search page or the dashboard and understand why there are so many. And he was bringing to life how the male characters or male categories, because the platform is for the male gaze, how they're oddly relatable. So all the male porn stars play something like a lawyer or accountant or a plumber because they're weirdly relatable to the men that watch it. And the message is, I can be a normal dude who is a plumber, a tradesman, whatever, and this random hot chick comes on to me. And it taps into that identity, and it keeps them engaged, keeps them coming back, keeps them I'm not going to say scrolling, they probably aren't. They're probably using it for one reason and leaving. But I can imagine that's why they do that.
Of course, yeah, I hadn't thought of it.
Such a strange industry to bring up with you, Will.
Well, yeah, I can see that. I mean, people want to see people like them on the screen, and I guess it helps with the fantasy. I don't know of that Paul is offering. But yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Does humor have a purpose in storytelling?
Yeah, but humor's a really great connector. I mean, humor is a kind of a fundamental way of connecting people. So when people laugh together, it's a people like us moment. It's a we are connected moment. So it's a very easy way of for advertisers and marketeers to make people identify with their brand. If you make them laugh, you just automatically feel connected, and that's because a lot of humor is predicated on a kind of shared understanding of reality. So if you understand even a typical joke, is structured in such a way that the punchline is this moment where you suddenly understand what's going on in the joke. And so the punchline is this moment of connection between you and the joke teller. I see what you're saying. So often in comedy, the laugh is a reward for sharing reality, for connecting in that way. And I think that's why laughter does sort of bring people together in a really powerful way. If everyone's laughing together, if you're in a social event and everyone's laughing, it feels amazing. It feels wonderful. It feels like you're all experiencing the same reality.
And I guess it's an indication of whose side you're on. Definitely. As well.
Yeah.
Like I remember on the playground as a young person, I would have guessed the punch is more violent than the laugh, but I think the punch is more violent than the insult, and I think it's the other way around, because if you punch someone and assert your dominance, you have status of dominance. Yes, for a few moments you are the victor, but usually people will crowd around the victim and support them.
Yeah.
However, if you insult someone with a hilarious insult, then you garner status more than you would from punching someone. I really believe the insult is greater than the punch. Yeah,
I do too. I mean, I'm reluctant to go fully into the kind of words of violence things, but words are social violence. And I think social violence really matters because, as I said earlier on, we really, really care about our reputation. And to the extent that a lot of people care about their reputation more than they do about their actual physical lives. That's why when with smoking, they try to stop it by telling you it's going to kill you. No one cares about that. It makes me look 8% cooler, and that's why things like cancel culture is so awful. Like, it feels like, they lost their job, it's not the end of the world. But it kind of feels like the end of the world to that person because that's their identity, that's their reputation has been destroyed. So that kind of idea of social violence, social pain, I think it's really important. It does. I would rather be punched in the face than humiliated in front of lots of people that I care about every day of the week.
As we wrap up, I want to talk about the power of sacred symbols.
Oh yeah.
And how unspoken, logos can build teams and build tribes. Like, I was reading the tail end of your book on the flight earlier, and I looked around at Howie and Andres who were filming today, and we're all wearing the exact same T-shirt. None of us coordinated this; we just did it because it means something to us, because we're showing up and performing a duty or a job. And it was so fascinating to see the lesson in your book play center stage for me as I was coming to interview you. So, tell me about branding and about logos and these sacred symbols.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fundamental human behavior. So, again, with this kind of ant meets ape, and the ant part of us wants to connect into groups, and part of our identity is the groups we belong to. So, and if we're identified with the group, we're proud of that. When we identify with anything, what that means is we make it a part of our identity. So, if you're a Swiftie, Taylor Swift is part of your identity. It's literally part of who you are. And it's the same with your OS stuff. This is part of who I am, and this is why, I feel like there's been some sort of discourse recently, in the last few years about I'm not able to bring my full authentic self to work, and it's like that's pure narcissism. You're not supposed to bring your full authentic self to work. You bring the part of you to work that's going to aid the work. When you go to work, you're not your full authentic self. You're not the one who does roller skating and walks the dog and likes hummus or whatever it is,
They're very late examples.
Exactly. That stays at home, it's this kind of, as I say, it's pure narcissism. You come to work to add value to work, and if you've identified with your job, and if you've identified with the group that your job represents, that's great. But what that means is that when you go to work, you're just expressing the part of you, the part of your identity that manifests at work. So that, I think that's right, and that's what I say in the book. That if you're hiring staff, people don't get too caught up in qualifications and experience. Hire for identification. Is the person sitting in front of you desperate to work for you, full of, enthusiasm? Are they identified with your mission, identified with your company? The other stuff can be taught, but if they're already identified with your mission, they're going to want to learn, and they're going to want to put in the hours, and they're not going to be worrying about, I'm not getting paid as much as this person. They're not there just for the money, just for the promotion. They're there because they want to go to work and make that work a part of who they are. And that's the person that you should be employing, not the person with the best technical CV.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I might have read this in your book around how the correlation between pay and workplace happiness isn't a reliable measure. But if you can compare your pay to others in your workplace, then it's a deciding factor of workplace happiness.
That's right. That's right. So there's no. People are always surprised by this, but like huge studies reliably find there's no correlation between pay level and work satisfaction. Because we live in this very industrial revolution mindset, which says people are motivated by money. So they go to work. That's the deal. They go to work. You give them money, and it's like I'm bribing you for your energy. Like, it's a really depressing, cynical conception of what work is, and it's completely inaccurate. Of course, people need to be paid enough and need to be paid fairly. Like, I would never argue anything against that. Like, people do need to be paid fairly, but ultimately it's not pay that motivates people. I mean, anybody who's had a pay rise knows that. You get a pay rise, you're really pleased for about 3 days, then you just go, I deserved it, and you forget about the pay rise. Like, the pay rise stops being a thing in your head. It's just what you get paid now. But the time when it does matter is when suddenly you know what other people are being paid, and if there's a sense that someone doing the same job as you, or somebody that you don't really rate, is being paid more than you, then it matters. But it's not the actual cash that is the problem; it's the status. Because we're obsessively interested in the status. A status is part of our identity. How's my identity doing? So if there's a sense that the status game is unfair, that really bothers people.
As we wrap up, if I were to ask you, I've given you this hypothetical billboard on Oxford Street. We're in London today, on Oxford Street, and I wanted you to post a atomic takeaway on that billboard in relation to the power of storytelling. What would you want to inform London or the world of?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just this idea that you are a story. That's what it would be like. You can't understand yourself. You can't understand human society, human culture, without understanding that people are stories. That's what we are, with these sets of ideas. We're made out of imagination. And then once you begin to understand that, you begin to understand a lot of the craziness in yourself, and the unhappiness and the happiness in yourself, and lots of the craziness, happiness, and unhappiness in the people around you. So life begins to make a lot more sense when you understand that you are a story.
Well, thank you for coming on Origin Story.
It's been great. Thank you very much.